All right. Welcome everybody, including our panelist, to May 2nd. This is a panel we're doing for new social workers, newly graduated social workers, essentially just kind of what you should know as a social worker, maybe even what you would like to know, maybe what you don't know, but probably should know. We're going to be hosting this panel for the next about hour, 15 minutes or so. My name is Lori Eldred. I am the Region 4 rep with NASW Michigan. If you're not familiar with the Region 4, we're a very large area. And so it's been like a challenge. I got to remember all counties. So we are Kent, Ottawa, Muskegon, Mecosta, Newaygo, Montcalm, Ionia. Oh, and I think, Newaygo, Mecosta, Oceana is the other one. So it's a very large and very diverse, I think, region, probably one of the bigger regions outside of probably the UP. The UP itself is its own entity and region. That's Region 1. And so I was elected, I think it's been about a year or so since I was elected, and definitely this was one of the things on my wish list was to host a panel with experienced social workers, folks that have been licensed for a while, in the field for a while. I think I estimated, based on kind of what I know of everybody, we've probably pushed in the 100 years maybe of experience, which I think is pretty phenomenal in the field, just with everybody's variety of experiences, strengths, different positions that folks are in. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody that is our panelist. And I will allow those panelists just to have a time to briefly introduce themselves and kind of talk about what they're doing right now in the field of social work. So if you do have questions, which I'm hoping everybody that is here is coming with questions, we have a couple options. You can drop those questions in the chat and I will be answering those questions, or raise your hand. I can unmute you and then you will be allowed to ask the question of the panelist. As the Region 4 rep, I do want to kind of push some of the events that I have going on. So this summer, I'm going out throughout the region and hosting a coffee kind of meet and greet. And so if you're interested, I have one later this month. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but one later this month where I will be out on a Friday, May 17th for coffee. I've got a couple meet and greets for coffee in June, one in July, and then one in August, and that will be here at the Lantern towards the end of the month in August. We do have a Facebook group, so if anybody's interested in joining that group, I can drop the link there, or send a link out with the email to participants and even to the region, just so that you can join. I'm posting a lot of events and things like that in the Facebook group. So I definitely encourage, if you're interested, to join the group to have a sense of what's going on in Region 4. And then I'm going to just hand this off to the panelists, who are just going to do a brief intro, talk about themselves, their experience, maybe talk about what you're currently doing, how long you've been in the field, and just anything else that you're involved in that you would like to share. So I will go just based on my screen. I'm going to start just with Sarah.Wolf.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Sarah.Wolf. I am a clinical manager and a therapist on a case management team with Network 180. So we serve folks with severe mental illness, and I work on an interdisciplinary team. So therapists, case managers, psychiatrists, nurses, everybody collaborating. I've been with Network 180 for almost 8 years. And since then, I've been in a number of different roles, including like an access center clinician. And then historically, I also had a private practice, a small private practice that I did part-time. And then I stopped doing that when I became a manager and needed my schedule after hours to, help my team. I think that's all about me. I graduated from Western Michigan University in 2016.
Thank you, Sarah. And next I have on my screen is Lynne. Lynne, if you just want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lynne Bosema. I work with the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America. So I work on a national role. I got my social MSW in 2007. So been doing this a while. And I actually went out of state to the University of South Carolina and originally from Michigan, but not from West Michigan originally. I've been back here, back to Michigan about 7 years now. So I am, we all wear different hats. I've had different roles, but I'm a macro social worker. And so I started my work working with individuals and families, primarily with disabilities. So mental health, psychiatric disabilities, developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, all of that. Started in a legal advocacy organization that was a nonprofit that was a team of attorney and non-attorney advocates, so MSWs and attorneys. So it was a really interesting way to start my social work career. Um, and then that kind of led further on to different roles in program management and development in a variety of different spaces, jack of all trades. And so now my most recent role, I'm in a patient advocacy role. And so that's been a new shift, working more in the healthcare um, space. And so I didn't tell you what all I do. I'm the health equity and outreach program coordinator. So I use a lot of those social work skills in bringing groups of people together, convening stakeholders, developing projects, conflict management, and all the spaces, all those social determinant of health areas that you're learning about in school. We have to be experts at those on all levels because we have patients with a variety of needs that come to us. And I'll pause there. It's been an interesting adventure. So thanks, Lori, for having me.
Thank you, Lynn. Mariah, if you would like to go next.
Sure. My name is Mariah.DeYoung. I am the Substance Use Director at Pine Rest Christian Mental Health Services here in Grand Rapids, which means I oversee all of our substance use programming. So I oversee our inpatient detox and residential programming, our partial substance use programming, our intensive outpatient, and then all of the substance use services that happen in our outpatient clinics. So I have a wide variety of inpatient and outpatient in my everyday life. We have 21 outpatient clinics throughout the state of Michigan. So we're my main campus here in Grand Rapids, but I do travel around across the state depending on what the needs are. And before I came to Pine Rest, I've been here about 12 years. I worked for 10 years at a community mental health, severe and persistent mental illness, also with families. And I really, really enjoyed crisis work and that type of thing. So substance use was a nice fit for me to have a little bit more of a regular schedule, but still get some of that intense meeting people where they were at, sometimes on their worst days. So I have that background and then have transferred here to Pine Rest and been here, like I said, almost 12 years.
Thank you, Mariah. And a fun fact about Mariah is Mariah was my supervisor for all of my clinical hours when I was at Ionia. So when you say, and when she says that she really enjoys and is also very good at crisis work, I will absolutely echo that. Crisis, especially with, the supervisees that she had, probably myself included. So I definitely want to say thank you for that and echo that statement. Next up, we have Reid.
Hi, everybody. My name's Reid. I've been in the field for 5 years. I graduated with my MSW from U of M School of Social Work in 2018. Since then, I have worked for the same group practice called Therapy Today. We're a large practice with 2 physical locations in East Lansing and Ann Arbor, but we service the entire state of Michigan and also a few other states as well, because we have some providers living in other states working remotely for us. Something that we are really proud of is offering same-day appointments because we find we want to fill in that gap that so many people experience seeking out mental health care, that people won't answer the phone in private practice, right? Like it's hard to get a response. And so our founder and director said, I'm gonna be a part of changing that problem and giving people, when they have that motivation or they're calling in crisis, we can see them same day. So we are just a very large, very well operating practice. And in addition to my work there as a therapist, I'm our clinical development coordinator as well. So I'm working to support our new hires, people who are new to the field or who are just new to private practice. I also help to develop programs, policies, procedures, basically just help support the development and the functioning of the practice. So I like being able to use some of those micro and macro skills as a social worker there. And then something else that is new that I'm so proud of is that we've opened up a psychotherapy training institute called Mindful ISTDP. That stands for Intensive Short-Term Dynamic Psychotherapy. And this is a type of therapy that I had certainly no exposure to in graduate school. I really didn't even get exposure to psychodynamic therapy in grad school. So it's a part of our mission to help bring exposure to this therapy to as many people in Michigan as possible, because it really is a life-changing therapy. It's focused on treating the root cause of presenting mental health issues and is attachment focused. It's experiential and somatic in the body. It's changed my life as a therapist and as a person. It's been very healing for me personally as well. So I would be happy to share more about that, and happy to talk more too about private practice life and what that's like leaving grad school and early days of working and joining that even later on.
Thank you, Reid. And then last but certainly not least, Ebony.
Hello. Okay. So I have about 7 years in nonprofit, and it did overlap with private practice. I've been in private practice for about 6 years. I started this, it's a group private practice now. I did start it just with me. And then some people approached me and was like, I love your mission and would love to work with you. And so I I brought on contractors, and then it turned into employees because they wanted benefits. So now we are a small group private practice that really prioritizes representation and also accessibility to mental health services. We proudly say that we take Medicaid and even have a sliding scale. So super, super important. Our private practice does workshops, trainings, and then obviously individual and family services as well. And we address an array of diagnoses from, depression to PTSD. I actually specialize myself and am certified and a consultant in training in EMDR. I absolutely love it. I've done my own work with it, and I will never use another intervention. I mean, of course, I may have to, but like this is my cup of tea right here, and I absolutely love it. And I live it and believe in it. So other than this, I also, my most recent project, because I tend to have my hands in a lot of things, I'm really just dedicated to removing barriers. I see a problem and I'm like, well, what's within my control to where I can address it? So I ain't gonna talk too long, but the most recent thing that I've developed is a nonprofit that's called RESI, which is short an acronym for Resilience Empowerment Services. And right now it's just basically dedicated to removing barriers. So whenever we see something, we're like, oh, let's see if we can get some funding, which is not easy, but so props Mariah to Pine Rest, because honey, yes. But yeah, so that's my most recent project, and that's a little bit about me and some of the things I got my hands in.
Thank you, everybody, for those brief introductions. I'm going to open this up now for any questions that any of the attendees have. You can either, like I said, raise your hand, I'll unmute you, or you can drop that in the chat. I also have questions that I'm going to ask of the panelists if we don't have a ton of questions coming our way. So seeing none, I think one of the questions when I thought about this panel and conceptualizing it, I think the first question I have is taking care, kind of taking care of yourselves. Social work is a challenging profession. I think, Ebony, you were saying it absolutely right. Like so many of our folks, and often even us as social workers, there's a ton of barriers. And that can really be hard, frustrating, even sometimes losing a little hope based on some of those barriers. So how do kind of each of you take care of yourselves while working in this profession? And then you guys can kind of unmute and talk as you would like to do.
Okay, I'll go first. So, self-care has always been I have an interesting perspective on it just because of the way I was raised, right? Like my mom was a workaholic, and like for me, it's like it just is so natural. It's innate. And so I have found myself, well, for one, I really, really love the work that I do. And I remember one of my supervisors when I was fresh out of grad school was just like, dang, Ebony, like, how are you always, you have all of, you're working at the nonprofit, you're working in private practice, you're doing, like, how are you balancing all, and I was delivering packages for Amazon. So like, how are you balancing all of this? And, at that point, I really didn't know because it was so natural. So one of the things that I encourage and I live by and do myself is actually schedule it in, because if not, I'm not going to dedicate it. And I think it's important to remember that your body and your well-being is an investment. So you have to prioritize taking care of it, or else it will sit you down. And I remember being sat down because I was working, and I was also a single parent, so and going to school full time, and it was like, nope, body shut down. And so you would have thought I would have learned, right? But now what is one thing that I really just encourage is, hey, schedule it in. Like schedule in time for yourself, and you really have to make sure that you identify your hobbies, right? You know what feels right when you're taking care of yourself. So
That's a good one. I like that. Put it in your schedule. If it's in your schedule, right? Sometimes it's more likely to have it happen than think that you want to have it happen. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I would build on that. I also really love what I do, and between Therapy Today and our training business, I now wear like 4 or 5 hats between the two, and especially working a hybrid schedule, I can really easily overwork. I also feel a really sincere motivation to get the word out there and connect with more people and create our marketing, all this stuff. And so I noticed myself too, Ebony, this last year. My body sat me down, and then I had to have the courage to talk to my directors and say, like, I'm really overworking and I don't want to lose momentum, but I'm starting to suffer the consequences of that. And they didn't know I was overworking until I brought that to their attention. That wasn't pressure they put on me. It's kind of pressure I put on myself, and didn't feel like I could say no or allow things to slow down. Like that's going to be a reflection of me. So I think a lot of us go into this profession because we just feel this yearning to make a difference and create change, and we want to see that actualized, but we have to remember to take care of ourselves first. So after I advocated for that, they've helped me, come up with a tool to be a bit more rigid really about my hours. And now it's in my hands to have those boundaries about my time. I'm still growing in that department, but it's gotten so much better. And then I think the other side of that is once I say I've met my, hours for the day, it's an intentional practice to come back to my body and really slow down. And rather than busying myself and, overloading my schedule now with the hobbies or the fun things, the podcasts, I've actually learned how important it is to slow myself down, even just for 10 minutes, and to notice like what feelings got dredged up during my work day, what anxiety am I feeling inside. I feel so much better when I remember to do that. So I think those are two things I would say: advocate for yourself. And then also, if it's not a structural issue, it might be an internal thing of learning how to slow down and pay attention and take care of yourself.
Thank you, Reid. Anybody else have some thoughts on kind of taking care of themselves?
Yeah, I have a couple of things. A supervisor told me many years ago, and I have done this over the years. I have a longer drive to work. And the supervisor told me to, on your way to work and on your way home from work, pick a spot where you transition in your mind. So for me, I drive from the Lake Odessa area to Grand Rapids. So for me, it's like the Lowell exit on 96. When I hit the Lowell exit on my way to work, I start thinking about work. Now, it's kind of like anything with mindfulness. You catch yourself, you do it other times, but I try to, at the Lowell exit, go, okay, what's my day look like? What am I gonna do? I change my train of thought. And then on my way home, I hit the Lowell exit and I'm like, okay, dinner, all of those type of things. And that's kind of my transition point. I needed that actual physical point I drove past. Not perfect at it by any means, but it's something that has worked for me. And then also, I'm in therapy myself. We talk about therapy for our patients and how great it is and all of those things. But one of the self-care things is making sure that you are getting the support you need. And sometimes that's through therapy.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I agree with all my colleagues. But I was just going to say therapy too. I think this is just my mantra, but I think all helping professionals should have some mental health support, because it definitely takes its impact. And I have found many of us come to this work with our own baggage, often not addressed, and you bring that into practice intentionally or unintentionally, and that kind of slowly unravels as you do this work long enough. And that passion is what I think brings us to this work, and I think many of us here are really lucky that it keeps us going. But it's also, that passion can be a double-edged sword, like Reid, you mentioned, like it can also kind of burn you out. The other thing I would just add to that mix is solid supervision with someone you can trust, and whether that's in your employer agency or not. So I get my supervision externally, because as a macro social worker, you often are the only social worker in the space. So it can be very isolating, and often there's a lot of conflict potentially with values and ethics at times when you're working with other multidisciplinary teams. So regardless, I think those are two critical things that I wish I learned sooner than later. So, and I work virtually. I didn't mention that. So similar to, you mentioned Reid, hybrid. So there's a whole other bag of issues to deal with when you're making your own schedule and working across 4 time zones. I could really just check out if I wanted to, and so I have to be really disciplined on how I structure my day.
Thank you, Lynn.
And I just have one last thing to mention, because honestly, y'all covered it. But one thing that so there were a couple of mantras that I found to be really helpful when I was first graduating. One of them was, this is the work that I love. Like, there's a reason that I'm choosing this profession. And so reminding myself of that on the hard days. And then a mindfulness of just every 2 weeks, what's one thing that went even okay, that went there, a client strength or a problem that was solved. It happens more often than that. Some people can find something every single day. When I was an AmeriCorps member, it was kind of tough because we were signing people up for Medicaid and getting a ton of denials, and it was during the Affordable Care Act rollout. And so for me, it was every 2 weeks, just find one thing that worked out, and that helped me to stay motivated.
Thank you, Sarah. I do have a question in the chat. So the question is, it kind of a 2-part question. So first part is, just how folks focused in on how they kind of narrowed down what you guys are doing. So how did you narrow or kind of pick maybe the roles or the areas that you're working in now? And then what has been your favorite role that you've worked in so far? It's a good question.
If I may go first again. So for me, mine was ignited through being furious. I was absolutely furious. And so that emotion was enough to motivate me and to drive me. When I was looking up different modalities and I came across EMDR, and I started looking for EMDR therapists. And at the time, there was 28 clinicians, and they were all Caucasian, so there was no representation in that. And then when I did the work myself, it even so more upset me because there was no representation. And of the 28 clinicians at the time, there was only 3 of them that I found on their websites where they took accepted Medicaid. So for me, it was the emotion that drove me, a problem that I seen and what was within my control. And so that's when I became the first clinician of color in Kent County to be trained. Now there's about 5 or 6, and now I'm the only one that's certified and consultant in training. So that really was a pusher for me because that was ridiculous. So if you maybe find something that is motivating you off of emotion, that can really ignite you and drive you. And I'm telling you, there's nothing like that fire there and I love it. And then the second question was, I'm sorry.
The second one was what's been the favorite or your most favorite role that you've been in so far?
Oh yeah, man, private practice. I love it. I love it. My people, my team is amazing. I love the culture that I've built, man. When I created this, like my focus was like social workers always have to like negotiate. Like they have to they get paid well and they're unhappy, or they're happy and they get paid like nothing, and they're overworked. So for me it was really creating a balance, and that's what I did, making sure my people are paid well and that they are happy. I know my people's favorite colors, like I pour into them, and that's really, really important. And if there's a moment where I'm like, you know what, I need some partnerships and pouring into my team, I will do that. And I will bring on people to support me in that because I have my hands in a lot of different pots, right? So that comes with self-awareness. But absolutely, private practice, the role that I am in now, the fact that I can choose the modality that I utilize, and I can hone in on the demographic that is attracted to our brand and who I serve is beautiful. And especially because I've had experience and I'm like, okay, well, now I can choose what I would like to address. And for me, it's trauma all day. So yeah, answer your questions.
Okay, thank you, Ebony. Anybody else has feedback? So the 2-part, kind of how folks narrowed down to kind of focus where you're working at now, and then what has been your favorite role so far?
So I can speak to this because I've kind of been on a journey. I was going to be a psychologist, like all the way through high school. I was going to be a psychologist. I was so fascinated by how the brain works and how behavior comes to be and patterns. And so I was just really curious about mental illness in general. And then I started meeting people that were living with mental illness and seeing their resilience and hearing their stories and hearing about how they had to make so many accommodations for the world around them. And so I really appreciated just being able to be in the therapy role. I think that was my favorite role that I was in, is just being able to support them and help in, guidance and tools and just giving, building their toolbox. So that I think is my favorite part of getting to work directly in a clinical role, is seeing people grow and make progress.
I think for me, it's been both. The answer to both questions is it's been different at different points in my life. I loved my work when I was working in child development with the 3 and under population. I loved the crisis work, like I mentioned before. However, when we became foster parents, the crisis work didn't really match my home life anymore and became more of a stress than it was a passion. So for me, it's been different things at different points in my life. I don't think that's one of the things I love about social work is it's a journey and there's so many options on the journey. You can work with older adults, you can work with autism, you can work with kids, you can work in substance use, you can work in healthcare. I mean, you can work with trauma. There's so many choices and options that you can do the same thing for your whole career, or you can look at lots of different things as your life changes and what are your needs for your family and your personal life. And that's what makes me love what I do and the variety. And so, like I said, it's been different stages of my life. I've loved the different things.
Love it. I'll jump in real quick. I would agree with you, Mariah, just having been in different roles for a while. This is gonna sound really cheesy. I feel like this field kind of chose me, like how I narrowed it was not my choice. So my first year of graduate school, so I went into this work knowing I wanted to do macro. I just always had like an interest in larger systems. And so as you probably know as students on here, you don't always get the favorite field placement that you want. And so my first year placement, I landed in hospice care in rural South Carolina. Now, mind you, I'm from Detroit, which I didn't share, and my goal was urban community development. So I was like, what's going on here? But I just rode that wave and did that year of my intensive micro work. And anyway, so the second year field, I ended up having a more macro-ish setting, and I ended up being my full-time job. So they hired me. Like you all know that happens if you give a good field experience and an opening, I was hired. And so that kind of started my journey with disability civil rights. I started learning about the history of people with disabilities and how that runs parallel to the civil rights movement with all the racial and ethnic stuff that has happened in the 1960s. And so once I started learning more and more, so entered the field, I realized I had a passion for social justice. And that passion is kind of the continuing thread throughout my career, just depending on the setting, and kind of gets me fueled up. Ebony, and my role as health equity, anything, you're usually, I'm usually the roles I've enjoyed, it's uncomfortable, but it's saying the hard things that we know are true in a room where people need to hear it. And so saying terms like this policy is racist, like people don't enjoy hearing that, but sometimes as social workers, we have to deliver that information to make change happen. And so I think this like little spark of kind of being frustrated, myself living in poverty and having lived experience and experiencing discrimination as being a person of cultural, our life experience, right? We bring that to the table, and I think that starts it, but then you got to find something to keep it going. My favorite role has changed, but I'm finding now, like in my middle age, that the common thread is really people and stories, one of you mentioned, and that is in every system. And then what I didn't anticipate is that a lot of times my colleagues and other professionals would also be impacting more than I had anticipated. We also think of like clients and groups, but really having an impact on the culture of an organization is really exciting. And so anywhere that I can make that effort and bring our expertise and understanding systems has kind of been my role. I really like my role because I'm virtual, and currently it is helpful for my family life. I have 2 small children with neurodiverse needs. So I laugh because I started my career and now I live my beginnings of my career. So you just never know. I would say kind of keep your eyes and options open. And it's been the best investment. I think there's so much we can do with the social work degree.
All right, does anybody else have any final thoughts? I do have another question another couple questions from the chat.
I have thoughts, but I think that they will actually blend into what I want to say in response to Tressa's question, so I'm going to wait.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to break this into two questions, same person. So I'm going to ask the second question first. So does anyone on the panel feel that they were prepared right out of their MSW program? The person asking this, they're graduating this weekend, congrats. And we'll be starting in a group practice soon. And so I think the first part of their question is, does anybody on the panel feel that they were prepared coming right out of their MSW program? I'm seeing no's from everybody.
Well, I feel like I thought I was prepared, and then I got into the field and realized that I didn't know anything. I think it was interesting because social work, it was so general. I learned so much about systems and how to overcome barriers and resourcing and all of that I did feel like I missed out a little bit on the specific modalities. And I really appreciated my first role at an agency because they paid for all of those trainings. They helped me to get connected to all of those things because it can be expensive on your own. Although if you can narrow down the direction that you want to go, it does pay off to kind of have those specific trainings that you're interested in as opposed to what your agency thinks that you need.
All right, anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I did. So I really appreciate this question. This is what I was really excited to come here and share just based on my professional experience. I felt certainly like I did get some clinical skills training in terms of I did my internship on the adult psychiatric inpatient unit at Michigan Medicine or U of M Hospital. So I do feel like I built up some of my tolerance, right, for being in the room, having really hard conversations and quick rapport building. But when it actually came to the question of like, what is true healthy emotional functioning? Like, what are we actually after in therapy? Because it's not just a space to vent and to talk, it is treatment. And so I feel like I had a fate situation that I bugged my director of therapy today. They didn't even have a hiring ad. Something in my spirit just told me I want to work for this group practice. And I was hired, and then I found out my director's name is Leslie Ald. She is certified in intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy. And I just had the privilege of being trained in this over the years at her practice to now I'm working towards certification, and I'm practicing this full time. Therapy Today is also a model that was just mentioned where we are a large group practice and we provide such good structure and support for new hires. And so a part of that is providing in-house continuing education for free. And that's both in intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy or ISTDP, as well as other modalities too. We bring those in and help train our therapists in different skills. So I think that's something, it appears as though you've already found your group practice, but I think that's something that you can look for. You know, what is the kind of support and structure that a practice is giving you? As mentioned earlier, right, depending on your phase of life, you might need a practice where you're just coming in, doing your job, and then leaving. That might work well for you. You might be in a place of life where you need more of that support and group culture and help. We provide in-house free supervision as well as benefits and retirement plans and all of the logistical type benefits. So if you're curious about us, I'd love to talk with you about Therapy Today, but then in terms of preparing for therapy, I think that, let's say you're continuing with your group practice. I would love to connect with you and even share a bit about some of our offerings, because when I first started as a therapist, I was kind of swimming and trying to figure out what kind of therapist am I. My mind went to CBT because this is manualized and I can pull out the worksheets and do all of that. But what I came to find out over time is that it's not actually like treating the root cause of what's bringing people in. It gives some relief, it gives symptom relief while they're in treatment. And so my experience with ISTDP is that it is really creating lasting change in the body. It's restructuring people's nervous systems. It's unlocking information from their unconscious because it's a psychodynamic kind of therapy. And so I wish I had exposure to this in graduate school. I would be, I think, amazed with where I could be clinically at this point if I got exposure to some of that sooner. But I'm so lucky to have found it this early on in my career. I can't say enough about the importance of psychodynamic work and that going deeper to the root cause. And we do offer pretty affordable trainings. We even offer free introductions to this modality that give a free CE credit. So if you, Tressa, or anyone on this call is interested in learning more, it's a great modality to build on top of an existing therapy that you're doing. And so maybe just thinking about that, Tressa, in the future to answer that final question about like how to find CEUs, lots of places will provide that to you as embedded a part of your like employment package.
Yeah, and that was the second part of the question, was just having, the wanting to get more of that additional training and, in the continuing education, but often finding it can be expensive, right? I too am trained in EMDR and very worth it. I probably will completely echo everything Ebony said. Super worth it. Probably won't use other modalities unless I have to. And also it's an investment, right? It's not a $99 PESI training. So if anybody has thoughts or feedback just on how to connect to continuing education that maybe aren't super expensive. I know I will say, right, when you get out, you don't have to have all the CEUs done when you're a newly licensed clinician. You do have to have human trafficking and implicit bias, but even thinking about that in the future, I'd love to hear what people's thoughts are.
Yeah, and I will add a little bit to what Reid said. I want to shift a little bit away from the organization though, because I do believe that the responsibility is on you too, right? So it's really beautiful that organizations can offer this, but I really want to encourage you to you should never stop learning. Self-development is very, very important. And especially when you're looking at going into the field, when you walk across and you get your degree, learning doesn't stop. Even you have requirements now for CEUs, but even outside of that, I encourage, what someone said, the ongoing supervision, right? So we're looking at, well, what things can I do? You can look on the NASW website. You can join some Facebook groups and look at some trainings, read, invest, and pour into yourself. And I'm sure just like Lynne kind of came across some things that she was passionate about when she was like, oh, what's this? This is rural. I want urban. Right? It's like you will be surprised what will stick out to you. But yes, I just want to encourage you that it is very beautiful when an organization is able to pour into you I want you to be in a place that you're being poured into, but I don't want it to stop there. I want you to, and one of the things that I've actually found is that sometimes there's pushback when you encourage people to think outside of the system. And so I feel like a lot of times now people are being trained as robots. And it's like, no, I want you to know the reasons why you're making these choices or why this was a good perspective for you. I want you to know how you got there, even if it isn't the best route, right? And we can talk about that, but I want you to know the steps. And that just comes with like being able to analyze. And so I just would encourage self-development. Even coming into private practice, I'm hiring as well, right? I need you to at least know how to utilize 2 interventions. We can start with a baseline, right? We'll train you with the rest, but I need you to be able to some CBT, some DBT, something. And I know that some of the classes in the programs do not go as in detail as they should with it. And there's no ongoing outside of the classroom. So once again, it comes back to you. And I just want to encourage you to, once again, pour into yourself and be curious. Just be curious.
Any of the other panelists have any thoughts about trying to kind of this dynamic of trying to find CEUs that are affordable and also kind of that investment? I hear that as a bit of a theme, that investment in yourself through training.
I mean, it's taken me years, but I'm part of lots of different email groups and Facebook groups where I get emails about free trainings all the time. It's over your lunch hour from 12 to 1 most of the time, free CEUs. Now, that might not be an area you're passionate in, but if it works in your schedule, attend that training, learn about that thing, meet other people, exactly like Ebony's saying, like pour into yourself. Don't pour into yourself with $500 for a training you're not sure you want to do. But if there's a free training that you can attend the training, network, get to know people, and get on that listserv for more trainings and more different opportunities. And it will just build over time.
Thank you. So the next question I have is what are, and this could be an exhaustive list, so maybe I'll narrow it down. Maybe what's a 1 to 2 things you wish you knew before you started in social work, or even as a person getting towards the end of their MSW?
Yeah, I'll go. Man, do your work. It has already been mentioned here about therapy, but I'm telling you, if you don't know your triggers, if you haven't taken time to really look at the way you were raised, your past experiences, even recent experiences, even the experiences while you're in the classroom, okay, like those things, it will come up. And you want to prevent as much countertransference as you can. And so with that being said, make sure that you also have a supervisor that you can, because some of these things you'd be like, what is going on with me? I'm literally, I feel more connected. Maybe I'm viewing them as my younger version. What's going on with this? So just having a supervisor in a relationship where you can trust them and ask those questions, and normalizing those conversations too, right? But to go back to the question, one thing that is super important is doing your own work. Do your own work, or else it will come out. It's going to force you to do it.
I was going to say the same thing, and not just like knowing your triggers, but just the experience of what it's like to be vulnerable in a room and being asked really hard questions, and what's it like to feel something. It can get really easy when you're in this role to be like, yeah, just do it. This is just what we're doing. This is therapy, or this is, the work. And to really know what that's like for you to be put in that seat and to be looking inside, and how hard that is, how exhausting that is. Totally echo that it's important for us to have that experience of doing our own therapy or getting our own services, if we're going to be in that seat trying to help others with that.
I can jump in. Something I wish I knew before I started social work, and something I'm still learning. We are huge assets in the spaces that we are not found. And I would say, it sounds like many of you are considering more therapeutic roles. That's awesome. But don't forget about our values of service and social justice, and how you can also do different things in a volunteer capacity. By, your role will change. You'll get an opportunity to join coalitions, organizations like NASW and things like that. But I have found myself in a space in the last couple years in this role in particular, you can tell I keep referring to this role, where I have made assumptions that people know what social workers know. Like, we would be having a conversation about why a group of people can't access asthma treatment. And to me, the answer is really simple, right? I'm like, why are we even having this conversation, But what I quickly realized is like, there is a huge gap in all of this, many of the systems outside of where social workers are primarily employed. So where those policy decisions are made, where the money is being sent to programs like your healthcare agencies that are getting reimbursed for mental health services, make sure there's a social worker at that table so they can inform things on Medicaid reimbursement. I'm just using those as an example, because right now we are not in those spaces as we should be. And we are in my opinion, continuing to see a lot of barriers to services because many of us are not filtering up and we're not getting into the weeds of bigger systems. And so I think we just need everyone in their strengths to kind of rise within our field to have that change happen. But what I'm realizing is too, sometimes depending on where you all want to go as new students, you may find yourself not I wish someone may have told me this before I started. I'm not necessarily applying for social work positions. And so I'm having to learn how to sell our degree, our education, and our values in a business setting, in a public health setting, and XYZ, wherever, we can go anywhere, as I think social workers are needed. And people don't know about the value that we bring to the table. And it is really powerful. I would also wish someone would have told me how much money I would have made or not made. My first job out of graduate school, granted, this was a different time, I made $30,000. And that is shameful, even 20 plus years, almost 20 years ago. But now, knowing what I know, don't be afraid to ask for resources and know that you hold value. So definitely get comfortable after you get a few years of experience under your belt. I would encourage folks to be bold and start, realizing the asset that you are. It will come. You'll slowly get there. You won't live in poverty forever. You might have to have a few side hustles, but it is definitely, there's opportunities there. And I would also say, like, for anyone interested in macro social work, feel free to connect. It is a bit lonely. There is not, and so I think it's really important. I wish I would have known this ahead of time, how important it is to stay connected to places like NASW. I'm actually recently coming back after a long exit because I am looking for that connection back to the profession. So don't be afraid to come and go and stay connected as much as you can. Yeah.
All right, so the next question that I have, it's a little bit of a two-part one, but since we have folks kind of in a variety of agency and private practice, and I'd love to hear from folks in agencies as well as those in private practice, what do you see as the differences between agency kind of organizational work versus private practice? I know that often can be a big part of the decision making when folks are graduating and looking at where they want to go with their new social work degree. So I'd like to have folks kind of talk about if you've had experience in both, what those differences look like, or just kind of maybe what your experience has been in either private practice or agency work.
So I actually did private practice for 2 years part-time, and found that it wasn't for me at that season, which I know is not everybody's story, but for me, I really appreciated working on a team. And I have a family member who's like an entrepreneur and was so excited when I had my private practice and was saying like, you're your own boss. And I was like, I don't want that right now. Like, I still want to be a part of a team. I still want to collaborate. And I know you can do that when you're in a private practice too. I just wasn't able to because I was doing it part-time. It wasn't my whole heart and soul. I was actually really surprised at the acuity in private practice, because I think that there is like this myth going around that people, like the people in private practice or clients in private practice, were the worried well. And what I found is the acuity was pretty high. And so I appreciated working with that higher acuity on a team, as opposed to kind of individual private practice. But I know that that's because I was working very independently. I didn't network with coworkers as much as I would have liked. I think private practice offered me a lot more flexibility with my schedule, and so that can be a huge benefit for folks. But for me at that point in my life, I think working with an agency, having that consistency, knowing that I was going to get paid even if my client didn't show up, I appreciated that. So just a couple of things that I noticed.
Right, anybody else want to kind of take a crack at this question?
I have only ever worked in organizations, so I can't compare to private practice at all. But I can say that I did outpatient therapy for 6 months at Pine Rest before I came over and did the substance use work. So it wasn't private practice, it was still working at Pine Rest. But, and this is going to sound really weird as a therapist and social worker, I didn't enjoy individual therapy sessions all day long. Like, that just wasn't fun to me. I was bored, and I was just seeing people back to back every hour, going at somebody out of the waiting room, and I just didn't like it. And so for me, being in an organization or a agency gives me the variety of not having to do back to back sessions, because I just don't enjoy that work. And that was something when I left the community mental health, and I was like, okay, I'm done with crisis work. I'm going to have the slower, easier life of back to back patients. I learned, like you said, Sarah, it's not that easier, and it was too slow for me. I just didn't enjoy it and needed to look for something else. So for me personally, I would never look at private practice because I don't enjoy that type of work, but that's just what I enjoy doing, and being able to recognize that and realize that.
I find I'm working for a private practice that in a way kind of operates like an agency or an organization. So I feel like I have the best of both worlds, that, I'm on the other side of that spectrum where I can't imagine a life where I'm not doing many therapy sessions in a day. I just love it so much. But I also couldn't just do that. And I've never just done that. As the clinical development coordinator, and then now as our program coordinator for Mindful ISTDP, I've always got admin stuff that I'm doing. I'm training people in ISTDP now. I'm onboarding our new clinicians. I'm meeting with our administrative staff to problem solve and come up with policies and programs. So I do then, actually echo a lot of that I personally need more of that, like, teamwork, or feel like I'm a part of like a bigger mission, and I'm using those other social work skills. So I think that's something that's cool about private practice, is that you can scale that, based on what you're looking for. There might be a time in my life where I just need to have a little baby caseload, and I'm not responsible for anything else outside of that, and I am done at a certain time of day. But then you can also join a private practice that is functioning and having so many different areas as a part of that. So if that's something you're looking for, know that that's out there. It doesn't just have to be therapy. You can take on another role and be a part of a team and work to support, other areas of mental health care, or work to support like the development of the business that you're working for too.
So kind of piggybacking on that question, have heard, you know, folks having thoughts about new LLs, new social workers joining private practice versus starting out at an agency. I would love to hear folks' thoughts, just if it is, helpful to start out at an agency. So maybe you do get those, that training that's provided, you get kind of some more of that supervision. A number of agencies do provide free supervision. Generally, it's kind of the supervisor that you're working under, and just some other supports. And then I also hear, right, when you're in private practice, or you're your own person, your own boss, you can kind of shape it around what your life and family is. So I'd love to hear thoughts about kind of new social workers, new clinicians starting out in private practice versus agency work, or does it maybe not even matter?
Yeah, so I actually was in private practice as soon as my degree was in my diploma was in my hand. So, but I will say that I had to be very motivated and I had to learn a lot. And I'm very much self-taught, like I'm a first generation of everything. So I know that I already knew what it was going to take, right? Um, so if you look and it's kind of, I just encourage, like, you have to be very disciplined and motivated, and that self-development is really key. And those are some of the things that I would encourage if you're going to go into private practice. And for me, that I that's something that I hold and have. And so, and then I was already working at a nonprofit before I even graduated. So I kind of did have a little bit of experience, but I learned from and knew that this was something that I wanted to do. And I guess one of the things too is I feel like everybody has different reasons for going into being a social worker. I have yet to run across someone that was just like, yeah, it's just because. Like I've everyone has some reason that they were like called to this, or that they want to do this. There's something in them. And so for me, I knew that because I was a juvenile delinquent, that turned my life around. I was like, my outreach it started with youth and then in teens and moved around. But anyways, so if I do not turn my nose up or frown, but I have received some feedback even for myself doing that. And I mean, this is my life, my choice. This is your life, your choice. And if you want to, I would just encourage those few things, right? You got to be very motivated and self-development, and then making sure that you find a team that does appreciate you if you're going to be in a private practice. So, I understand the perspective of like, well, you want to gain experience, and you can also gain experience by taking the step. I feel like that hinders a lot of people from following their dreams, is just taking the first step. So if you need to take the first step and just say, well, I'm going to do this, and I'm learning along the way, or I'm going to learn as much as I can from a book. And then I got to try it, right? And a lot of times people just don't give you chances. So sometimes you got to take them, right? I really feel like it just depends on the person and what is best for their life. Now, some things that I've noticed just working for an agency and then working in private practice, like, yes, you can make your own schedule. Yes, hopefully you're on a team that you enjoy, and a lot of agencies that are smaller and not as large can take the time to really invest and pour into you, right? Because there's not as many staff that they have to pay attention to. So, um, yeah, I lost my train of thought, but those are basically the gist.
Ebony, I really appreciate how you framed that in terms of really knowing yourself and knowing, like, I have the motivation to do this. I have the discipline to do this. I'm going to seek out these trainings so that I can gain the experience and do it. For a long time, I was kind of in that camp of like, you know, if you are going into private practice straight out of school, like you're not prepared. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I've seen so many people be able to do it successfully, but they are more self-starting than I am. They have more motivation, they have more discipline in that area. And so I know that that would not have worked for me. But I just appreciate, you know, people knowing themselves and also networking. Networking is so important. And if you can do that in a private practice, if you have a private practice that is supportive and they have consultation sessions and you can get, you know, maybe supervision or collaboration to help problem solve some of those cases and help you learn, then go for it. You know, it sounds like that's going to be the right fit for you. But if you're in a private practice where people are really in silos and you're just kind of doing everything independently, it's not the best place to learn straight out of school because you're still learning so much as you are after you graduate.
All right, anybody else have any final thoughts? Okay. I think one of my last questions will be I think this will be probably a good question to round things out. Just maybe briefly talking about ways that new social workers can set themselves up for success, right? It seems like there's so many avenues, so many options that any individual can take, whether it's macro, whether it's clinical, whether you're private practice or an agency, whether you're self-starting and want to, you know, open up a nonprofit, or, you know, you want to work at a CMH, or, you know, in really any capacity, you want to be a school social worker or work in healthcare. So are there like maybe a couple ways, 1 to 2, that new social workers can really set themselves up for success?
You know, I would encourage a new social worker to take a moment and visualize, like if they could imagine their ideal work situation, whether it's what they see themselves doing, if it's the pay, if it's a location, if you could like dream up your fantasy version of work, like what would that be? Because I agree, it can be overwhelming when you see the amount of options and, well, could I do that? Could I do that? I think something that's already been mentioned and something that I practice in my therapy is that when we're very connected to our feelings, you know, they give us the information we need to make good decisions here in this moment. You know, Mariah mentioned that as needs and lifestyles change over time, you realize that you need to try out a new position. And so just knowing like the options will be in front of you for the rest of your career, you can only make the decision about what's going to be best for you by listening to yourself in the here and now. And so I would just encourage you to take some time and really connect with yourself and see like what lights you up, what feels like the parts that you're least looking forward to, and then maybe using that as some internal direction of positions you would want to look for at this point. Right? Just knowing what sounds good to you right now. And then if you get into it and you discover something about yourself that you like or dislike the population you're working with or the actual role that you're in, well, then that's fabulous information to listen to. So I think, like, to sum up what I'm saying is to take some of that pressure off that this has to be, you know, the forever perfect role. But you know, your friends and colleagues might be choosing one path, but if you were to really just get in touch and listen to yourself, I think you'll find some really good information about what's best suited to you right now in this phase.
All right, anybody else had any final thoughts? I did also have another question come in the chat, but anybody else have any thoughts about just kind of 1 to 2 ways that folks can set themselves up for success? I know we've talked about several different things, but anything we're missing?
I think the best piece of advice that I can offer is to take take every opportunity, even if you don't necessarily, and I know that this has been said, but even if you don't necessarily think that it's for you or what you want to do. I had an opportunity to work with kids earlier in my career when I think I would have had more support and more training and supervision in it. And then later in my career, I realized like, oh, I really want to work with kids, but I have no experience. And that the new opportunity that I have is not going to really give me a lot of that experience. So, for me, I think I would have liked to have had a more well-rounded kind of experience at the front end when I'm still learning to be able to apply that later too. So take every opportunity if you have it, and you never know what can come from it.
All right, so our last question I'm going to ask before we kind of move into closing thoughts and some follow-up. The question, great question, what are some, and this might be a good one for you, Lynn, what are some of the career options for new social workers interested in macro jobs, macro positions and opportunities?
Yeah, great question. I wish secretly like it was super easy, like I'm going to get this certification and XYZ was going to happen. Unfortunately, that is not where I sit, or I've seen my other macro colleagues sit. So I think for a couple things I would say. I think a new graduate with a generalist degree, there's a lot of value in doing a generalist social work job potentially for a couple of years. And that might be case management, that might be, whatever that might look like that is of interest to you, not necessarily therapy if that's not your jam. Because I have found, and this is just, looking back, that in order to really be effective, let me back up. I think, we're all doing similar work. It's just the size of the system that is the different. And there's different strategies. And I use my micro skills daily. I use motivational interviewing skills all the time. And I've gotten, even though I'm a macro social worker, I've had to get trainings on micro skills. I'm not necessarily using them in a therapeutic way. So I think there's a lot of value in working in a generalist setting, potentially, would be my suggestion to a new macro social worker. Because those skills are going to build and make your long-term strategies, or long-term goals, depending on what they are, so much more impactful, because you're going to be able to see the system. If you're designing systems or advocating for change in a policy way, you're going to know a little bit better about the challenges it is when someone walks into a food pantry and I like to use examples, analogies. You're going to know because you've had that client sit across from you say they don't qualify for Medicaid because they're over $5 in their income. You're going to know all of the challenges people living, in the space that social workers. So I would encourage that. If that's not your jam and you're looking for more administrative, I would say search for positions like advocate is a popular one. You could be working in like a advisor capacity if you're working with like new students and helping them navigate their careers. You could work if you're near like the state capitol or wherever you are residing, you could try to get connected to helping like a representative run their campaigns. Really, the program manager. So when I've searched in the last 10 years for job opportunities, I've typically searched like program director, program manager, and just really fine-tuned it depending on what type of work I'm interested in. I'd also say think creatively about there's even spaces in corporate spaces for social workers. There's a lot of, we don't typically think, I always thought like human services, like social services, mental health, like all of that. But there's a lot of opportunities too if you just start looking across the board in different spaces, that there's things like even HR type roles or there's so many options. So I would just start searching and talking to a macro social worker and getting connected to their network. They could valuation. We haven't even talked about a program evaluation. That's a huge thing that I do as well. So maybe finding some volunteer opportunities too. It just kind of depends on what your interests are. Sorry, that's super vague, but macro is a tough nut to crack. I can't give like, here's the answer. But yeah, I think networking is going to be helpful in keeping your opportunities open, and then searching the job boards and talking with a current macro social worker and trying to tap into their network would kind of be the couple things I'd suggest. By the way, she's going to be my future intern starting in May. So thanks for the question.
That is a good, I know I said that in the chat. I was like, great question. I know, just as to a plug, right? I mean, NASW Michigan does do, and I know they've had recent trainings on macro social work, because I really am starting to see this is a really growing, part of the field in so many capacities, right? Like this whole idea of social workers being in like Fortune 500s in the corporate world is really growing. There's even and I don't remember the name, but doing a Google search. There's even, networking groups just for individuals interested in working in the corporate field in that more macro work. And so I know when you join NASW as a student, the rates are lower just for those membership fees. And then you can go on, we have a supervision registry for macro social workers. We have trainings, and I don't know yet that we have like work groups or, kind of groups that meet that are macro social work, but a great advocacy piece of like, macro social work is a huge need, especially with all of the disparities that we're seeing right now in our current community. Anybody else? I'm curious. I don't know if you have any, we have a few minutes left. Ebony, you're kind of in that macro space a bit as well, just in some of the nonprofit work that you're doing, just some of and even Mariah, just some of that supervision, although it's clinical, mostly clinical, but a little probably macro feel at times. If you guys have any quick thoughts or feedback.
I don't think I have anything other than to kind of echo what Lynn said, is you almost have to find that space on your own. I didn't realize how much macro I was going to be doing when I'm advocating with insurance companies and getting authorizations and working with different systems and writing grants and all of that type of stuff. That's not really what I signed up for when I signed up to be a clinical director here. But I am doing that. So I think, like Lynn was saying, is look at positions that sound interesting, that you think you could add value to, and what your experience is or what your passion is, and apply. I mean, usually most of the time in interviews, yes, somebody has a mindset of what they're looking for, but it doesn't hurt to go interview and have a discussion. And what does this job really look like? And how could it be shaped? And this is what I would love to do. And kind of just throw yourself out there and see what happens.
Oh, I'll just add one more thing. Nonprofits, I know Ebony, sounds like you're connected to. I didn't mention this, but my whole career's been in nonprofit work. So I would say that also lends to a variety of roles. Anyone who's connected or not, you're going to, like you mentioned, you're going to be writing the grant. You're going to be doing the fundraising. And so I think depending on where you're volunteering or working, you might have other opportunities to tap into some of those macro skills just by nature of the organization. So sorry, I'll pass it back to you, Ebony, not to steal your response.
No, I didn't have anything to say, but I guess I can add something now to the end of that. Well, because it's all like it's several hats when you're getting into macro. I guess depending on what kind of macro you get into, but contracting out, if you know that this is something that's not your expertise, you can still learn, but bring somebody on where it is their strength. And so I've had to hire, grant writers. I will have them like walk me through the process, right? I'll review what they have, but I mean, I didn't take that class. Yeah, so that's all I would add.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 5 minutes left. So I just wanted to ask for any final thoughts, feedback that each of the panelists has, just as we wrap up this panel.
I think don't be afraid to ask questions and look for support from those around you. We've all acknowledged that we didn't know what we were doing when we graduated. I will acknowledge I don't know what I'm doing some days here 20 years in. Like I will have experience and be like, oh, that's new. Never had that happen before. I'm gonna figure this one out on the fly. So don't expect that other people think that you know everything too. Ask questions, look for support, learn, be vulnerable in that. I think quite a few people on the panel have mentioned that of nobody knows it all and nobody expects you to know it all. So be okay with that.
Anybody else have any final thoughts? I know I got a few minutes left and I want to respect everybody's time because I'm sure everybody has things scheduled after this. So when we finish with this panel, since it is being recorded, it will get sent out to participants, and I will ask to see even if it can get sent out to the larger listserv. And within the emails that you get, I will have information on how to contact the panelists if you would like to do any follow-up or connection. We've really talked about this idea of asking questions, networking, right? Being curious, exploring, I think trying to understand what positions or what places in social work are really aligned with your values. I will also add my email as well if you have questions or thoughts or feedback for the region or myself as well. I'm happy to answer some of those. And so when you get the recording, there'll be that contact information. I will also post a link to the Facebook group for Region 4 so that you can join that as well and just kind of be up to date on any events in the region, as well as I'm often posting the link to the community calendar. So would really encourage you to check out, even if you're not a member and you don't have to, I'm not going to push that, but even if you want to check out other, webinars, we do a lot of lunch and learns, there's work groups, there's kind of a lot of different opportunities, especially as a new social worker. It can be helpful to just get connected to this larger professional organization in the network. I think I'm outside of some job opportunities. That's pretty much how I've met everybody on the panel. And so I appreciate all of the panelists for being here, taking an hour and a half out of their busy days and imparting your wisdom. And so thank you too for everybody who has attended. I hope that this was informative and that folks are able to pull little nuggets of information. I know I did, and I really appreciate everybody. So hopefully everybody has a wonderful weekend, wonderful rest of the day, and I will see everybody later. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.